G'day. Thanks, John, for that welcome. And having had that perspective there from Queensland, and it was a very comprehensive and dynamic presentation from John, I'll see if I can match that in some ways by giving you a perspective from Western Australia. And by way of background, in my current role, I've been seconded from the Department of Local Government to support the Metropolitan Local Government Review. And Metropolitan Perth currently has 30 local governments in the area. We also have regional local governments, which have as their members local governments, and the regional local governments essentially have delegated functions from the member councils, and they're mainly involved in the waste management field, so they're part of the metropolitan governance picture. Of course, the state government's a major player in many areas, and in certainly the key infrastructure and services. We've got a number of agencies active in spaces where, everywhere else in the state, local government does it, I guess, but because of the fragmentation or the scale of Perth, you've got special entity to run things like cemeteries because councils don't do it in Perth, it's the state. And I guess more importantly, you've got a WA Planning Commission is a key structure in that it came from a Metropolitan Region Planning Authority set up in 1960, became the WA Planning Commission in the 1980s, but it has a strong focus on guiding the growth of metropolitan Perth, and we have a statutory planning scheme, which I think is probably unusual among states in terms of having a statutory planning scheme guiding the growth of Perth. By way of background further, we're talking about reform of local government in WA, I guess because WA is really the only state where there hasn't been any significant reform to date. In fact, Peter McKinley's slide yesterday showed that in 1918, I think there was 147 local governments in WA, and it's not much that different today. There's a little bit of change at the margins, but it hasn't changed that much. And similarly, Perth had a similar number of 30-odd councils 100 years ago, and it's still got that number today. So, as I say, there hasn't been a lot of change in WA. Another part of that context is a significant population growth. I think the latest census coming out, the results in the last week or so showing that WA was the fastest growing state, and certainly the expectation is that Metro Perth will grow to 3.5 million over the next 30 or 40 years. So against that background, the local government minister announced a voluntary local government reform agenda in February 2009. And my little story there is that I was on leave down south with my wife, and I read this in the paper over my breakfast and really choked on my Wheaties, thinking I didn't see this coming. And I said to my wife, I think I'll have a bit to do with this. And as it worked out, I've been really part of the team in the department supporting this local government reform program, and in the last 12 months supporting the Metropolitan Government Review. But the objective of the minister really for this voluntary program is to create fewer but stronger local governments in the state. As I say, we've got 138 at the moment. I think we've got 45 councils with less than 2,000 people in the state. That reflects the population density, the size of the state in part, but also reflects the fact that we haven't had the reforms. And so we're about creating fewer, stronger local governments through amalgamation where possible. So in 2009, the minister invited councils to submit reform proposals. And we received the department, or the minister forwarded on to the department, received the submissions from all the councils. I guess there were a mixture of the predators and the deniers, the willing. There really wasn't any consistent line, and it was a bit hard to make progress when there had so many different perspectives from councils out there. But there were starting to be some wheels of change happening in some areas. To support further progressing it, the department developed two concepts to roll out to the sector. One is the Regional Transition Group, and one was the Regional Collaborative Group. So the Regional Collaborative Group was all about trying to upscale the extent of collaboration and resource sharing and shared services that were around the state. But the Regional Collaborative Group was aimed at the more sparsely settled remote areas of the state, like the Pilbara and the Kimberley, where amalgamation wasn't really an expectation, it wasn't seen as a priority. The Regional Transition Group, on the other hand, was being supported for all the more densely settled areas of the state in the southwest, the agricultural areas, the metropolitan area. And the Regional Transition Group was the idea that the councils would get together and have a good look at the scope for amalgamation. And in one of the meetings I went to with my Director General into a Metropolitan Council as part of trying to promote this idea, the Mayor said to us, "We've always said no to amalgamation, but we don't know what it is we're saying no to." And the idea of this Regional Transition Group was basically to give the councils the tools, give them the funding, so that they could look at the potential for amalgamation, and at the end of the day they could still say no. And so what we've had is that we've had I think 11 regional transition groups progressing around the state. Some, as you see on the screen there, the Subiaco-Nedlands one was one in the metropolitan area in the western suburbs of Perth. If they merged, they would have had a combined population of about 40,000 people. KPMG, with funding from the government, KPMG were engaged to do a cost-benefit or a due diligence study in conjunction with the councils, and identified savings of probably around about $4 million per annum on that entity, as well as a whole range of other benefits. But the councils, I guess at the end of the day, withdrew from the process and it didn't progress. Similarly, there were amalgamation proposals in some other parts of the state. The two areas there are in the wheat belt, in the amalgamation of the shires of Mininu, Morawa, Perenjori and Three Springs. Would have been great to see those four shires get together. They would have had a combined population, if they got together, I think of about 2,500. The proposal was defeated by a poll in one of the shires, by a poll of about, where about 200 electors voted, killed the proposal. So because it was defeated in one shire, the whole proposal died. Similarly, in Westonia Yilgarn, that proposal, there was a public inquiry, recommendations provided, it went to a poll and defeated. So there's been some progress, councils are looking at it, and the community has said no in some of these areas, or the councils haven't progressed. At lower left there, you've got one of the successes, if you like. In the last couple of years, 3 councils in the Geraldton region have come together and formed the city of Greater Geraldton, with a combined population of about 40,000. And I lived in Geraldton for a time in the 80s, and it wasn't a great place to live, but Geraldton is really changing and is, I think, a much better place now that they've got a council working together for its future in a much better way. So there's been some mixed progress around the state in terms of this voluntary reform agenda. The department's also played a key role in supporting capacity building in the sector. So we wanted to have fewer councils, but we wanted to have stronger councils as well. And I guess we've drawn in part from the New South Wales framework and approach, where we're supporting a common planning framework for long-term strategic planning, asset management systems aligned to national frameworks, long-term financial plans based on a common planning framework, and workforce plans to address skills and retention issues. So the department is working with the sector and providing frameworks and guidelines, providing funding for training and advice and so on. So we're busy on that front as well. So we're trying to get a stronger local government sector, but it's highly diverse in Western Australia. If you look at those stats on the screen, the largest local government, East Pilbara, is larger than the Shire of Victoria, larger than the state of Victoria, and has about, I think, 12,000 residents. So it's a very diverse sector. The Shire of Murchison, population 112, 6 councillors. So there's 1 councillor for every 18 residents, and it's a shire that doesn't have a town. It's a very diverse sector, so I guess while there's, you want to maintain closeness to the community, you can still maybe see that there's potential for some change, for some reform and some benefit to be gained from change in the sector. Metropolitan Perth is no less diverse. The city of Perth was split up in the early 90s, and at the time I think had a population of about 3,000 as a CBD council. It has now grown to 18,000, which makes it one of the 13 councils in Metro Perth with population less than 30,000. And so the average size is 57, and there are 6 greater than 100. We've got Peppermint Grove, is I think famous throughout the country somewhat. It is 1 square mile with about 1,700 residents, and it's been there since 1892. Again, so even in Metro Perth, you've got significant diversity. So put that along the side of the fact that Perth is changing. We've got exceptional growth occurring in recent times and projected going into the forward decades. So I've always come back to Perth from Melbourne and Sydney thinking Perth's like a country town, but Perth is moving to 3.5 million in my lifetime. And we've got new projects happening in terms of waterfront projects, sinking the railway line and so on. So the face of the city is changing, and the city is ever expanding out to the fringes. So against that background, the Minister for Local Government announced an independent panel to review local government in Metropolitan Perth in June last year. And the independent panel, 2 university vice-chancellors and the CEO of Leadership WA, so 3 eminent Western Australians, not with local government experience particularly, but I always use the analogy that as vice-chancellors of the university, they're essentially running towns. And if you take the UWA, its land area is larger than Peppermint Grove, its student population is bigger than about 6 of our councils, and it's got a governance bodies, local laws, provides services and facilities, etc., etc. And in fact, the campus of UWA spans 3 different local government areas in 1 suburb. So that's a bit of background. We've also got 2 advisory groups, I guess, to bring the local government expertise into to the panel, with the Director Generals of Local Government and Planning. The Director General of Planning, Eric Lumsden, is a long-time local government CEO himself, and also the Deputy President of the WA Local Government Association. So the panel was given terms of reference to look at all the factors affecting growth of Metropolitan Perth into the future, how it might be impacted on by national and international issues, and to research improved local government structures and governance models and structures for the metropolitan area. It was asked to identify new local government boundaries that would have a reduction in the overall number of local governments to better meet the needs of the community. So I guess a lot of people observe that, you know, this isn't an independent review when you're being told to, the terms of reference say there will be, more or less saying that there will be a reduction in the number of local governments. The panel's been asked to prepare options on the most effective structures and governance models and to present a list of achievable options. So against those terms of reference, you've got key drivers for change. Part of that context is our Planning Commission, I said, is a key body. Directions 2031 is really the strategic planning framework for Metropolitan Perth, guiding that population growth basically saying that I think by 2026 Perth will be at 2.5 million. We need to add so many 100,000 dwellings. About 50% of them will be in greenfields, about 50% of them will be in infill. You've got the Committee for Perth active in this space and actively advocating for better local government or fewer local governments, and they're really looking at the future of Perth in terms of they've got a paper there at Perth at 3.5 million and beyond. Also part of the context is the National Urban Policy, which is focused on more efficient cities, and COAG's review is more about effective planning. So it's all about metropolitan governance, and it's sort of in that space that we're operating. One of the issues is defining the Perth metropolitan area, and why might that be an issue? Well, I guess what the panel's dealing with is the middle map, which is essentially the metropolitan region scheme, comprised of 30 local governments. The Directions 2031, the key statutory planning framework, includes Perth and Peel, so the extra region to the south focused on Mandurah, which is like the Gold Coast of Perth, or the Geelong of Perth, is a satellite city that I think, in the words of the CEOs, I think they said not part of metropolitan Perth, but part of the metropolitan solution. So the Peel region has an important linkage to Perth, but they're not part of this review. And the left-hand map is really the regional development view of Perth. You might have heard of royalties for regions in Western Australia. We've got 9 regional development commissions for the Kimberley, the Pilbara, etc., the Peel. And that little corner of the metropolitan Perth that's missing from that map is part of the regional development areas of WA. So that little bit that's missing is getting some of the benefit of royalties to region, which means that in terms of boundary changes, then there's some sensitivities there about what you might do in terms of implications. So there's some issues around defining Perth. In supporting the panel, we've done a great deal of research and looked at local government reforms elsewhere in terms of Queensland and in New Zealand, and the recent review commissioned by the councils in southern Tasmania. We've looked at metropolitan governance models. Oop, I've gone too forward. Hang on. I'm out of order. No, I've jumped ahead. We've looked at community engagement, and we've looked at a whole range of things. But the metropolitan area is a big part of local government in WA, 74% of the state's population, and overall the budget of local government in metropolitan Perth is only about $2 billion, so it's not much more than Logan on its own. It's only about $2 billion, but you've got 30 councils in that space. I think one interesting figure that's not in that is that even though it's got 74% of the population, at the moment it's getting about 24% of financial assistance grants. Because of the nature of Western Australia, the equalisation formula has really pushed all the money out to regional WA, and all those councils in metropolitan Perth are basically getting the minimum grant only. As I say, we've done a lot of research in supporting the review process. It was announced in June, the panel didn't meet till August. The website's been a key vehicle for us getting information out and in, and there's about 40 background papers for the review on that website. We've released an issues paper, we've had public forums, we've taken submissions, most of them have gone on the website. We've released a draft findings paper in April. I've got some copies with me today that I don't want to take back to Perth, so if you want one, I'll leave them around. The panel took the step of releasing draft findings really as a progress report to say we've looked at all this information, we've taken public submissions, we've had these forums, this is what our thinking is of where Perth needs to go, and put it out for public comment, and now has to report to the Minister due at the end of June, but more of that shortly. We've had, as I say, the website was key for putting up, there's just 4 screenshots there of all the some of the information that's gone in there, the background papers, the publications, the submissions received. metroreview.dlg.wa.gov.au. As I say, we've had to date about 20,000 hits in the duration of the review. So we put out an issues paper that had about 25 key questions, and I've just given you a sample there about do we need better local government arrangements in Perth? Do we have too many local governments? Just trying to get feedback from the sector, feedback from the stakeholders, feedback from the community. And we got about 250 submissions, a mixture of views. Some people love their local government, some people hate their local government, some people think local government should be abolished, some people have issues with particular local governments, some see potential for some service to be better done at a metropolitan level, and obviously local government is closer to the community and more in tune. Diversity of views. There were views supporting change, that the review is needed and long overdue, the number of councils grossly excessive, too many local governments, too much bureaucracy, As somebody said, I think 30 sets of rule books for business and builders and developers and so on. But there are also views against change. No, where's the case for change? It's not clear. It isn't broken. The system isn't broken. It still works. Maybe using Chris Rose's sort of thing is that, we've got good local government in Perth, but I think the panel sort of come to the view there, that probably in those lines, that we've got good local government in Perth, but not great local government. Some local government submissions, some saw the need for change in the metropolitan area, but not in their local government. And if it was in their local government, it was more about give us suburbs X, Y, Z to the north, that would make a natural fit with our area and make us more sustainable. So the independent panel was appointed to cut through all these sorts of views and to make some learned, if that's the best word, some learned judgments about the way forward. There was diverse views about what the best size was, and some of these views came from the sector, some of these views came from the community. 30,000, 30 to 60,000. And there are ranging up to the views of let's have a single local government for Perth like Brisbane or Auckland. So there's no consistency, no consensus from any sector really. And as I put those views on size against the current average of 57,000 in Perth. We've consulted reasonably widely during the process. We met with representatives of each metropolitan local government, but some didn't meet with the panel. I think they saw the term of reference that there's going to be a reduction as a fait accompli, and I think one mayor described it as a charade or a farce and hasn't engaged in the process. We've met with a lot of stakeholders. I think we've had 11 meetings with 22 organisations as part of the process. So as I mentioned, we put out a draft findings paper only about 8 weeks ago now, and they weren't, I think it was 21 key findings. They're not recommendations, they were just the panel's conclusions so far. And basically they were the panel's conclusions about the role of local government and the relationship between state and local government, the panel's conclusions about structures and boundaries, and about governance in the sector. And so I'll just sort of take you quickly through the key findings. The finding about needing more strategic thinking and leadership across the sector, but that needing to come both from state and local government, and a need for that leadership in the context of the growth and the challenges that brings for Metro Perth. The panel has a clear finding that there's a need for change, that the status quo isn't going to provide the best basis for Perth into the future, and that there needs to be changes in structures, boundaries and governance. But the panel sees that the outcome of that being a stronger, more effective, more capable local government sector with an enhanced role and greater authority. So it's not about diminishing local government in the community, but actually making local government stronger and more meaningful to the people in the community. It sees risks in doing nothing, and I guess there's a bit of a fatigue in the sector since reform was announced by the Minister in February 2009, They want something to happen. And that, so the panel saying it should, to remove the uncertainty, there needs to be some prompt government decision making. There needs to be some vision for metropolitan Perth. Where's the vision now? There's no shared vision. There are 30 local governments, each with a vision for their patch of Perth. The state government's got a vision for Perth, but that vision doesn't really interface with local government. So the panel sees the need for a joint vision. And I think with that is also a view about, who speaks for Perth. I'll come back to that. There is a view out there that, if you move to larger local governments, we'll lose our sense of place and sense of identity. Because many of our smaller local governments are really sort of historical survivors of another time where a suburb had its own local government. So there's a strong sense of place, sense of identity, because that suburb is a local government. But the panels come to the view that you can still have sense of place and local identity, and as part of a larger local government. The panels looked at a whole range of potential benefits from reform, and that I won't go into those in detail. And like economies of scale is much argued across the sector, and it depends on this and it depends on that, and it won't be done or it will be done or whatever. But I guess the panel's seeing that there's potential there. And it's not the foundation of the case of the need for change. It's just one potential benefit. There's some other key benefits that are more telling or more important. There's some key findings about relationships and roles and functions, and this is where it's about metropolitan governance more generally in terms of how local government interfaces with the state and the other players. You can't look at the structure of local government in isolation from role and function and relationships. The panel sees some potential maybe for some changes in functions of who does what. Particularly the one where there's particular consensus, I think, emerged from discussions in the sector is waste management or waste disposal. That the approach now that's been in Perth for perhaps the last 30 years needs to move on to a metropolitan-wide approach that is more consistent, giving the scale of the issue, the level of investment required, and the fact that there's going to be no more landfills on the Swan Coastal Plain. That a new approach may be warranted. The panel's proposing a local government commission to work on or to oversee perhaps the relationship between state and local government, because perhaps not as bad as Queensland in the time of reform there, but there is tensions there between state and local government, and I think it's trying to find a way to move that forward. And also the Local Government Commission to oversee the implementation of the proposed reforms. And as I say, the panel sees it being a stronger local government and being re-empowered in areas of local planning, where in recent years the state government has basically withdrawn some of local government's roles because of the problems of capacity in the sector. So we think there would be a benefit to the community from being re-empowered in that area. The key finding, perhaps that everybody sort of flicked to when they saw it, was how many local governments will Perth have and where will the map be? Well, the panel flagged at that time that it felt, having looked at all the information given to it, that there were three options that they were considering more closely. A single metro council was one option. 5 councils based on the planning sub-regions, 1 for the central area and 4 quadrants of the metro area, or 1 based on 10 to 12 councils centred on strategic activity centres. And so the map at right shows you the planning sub-regions with the inclusion of Peel. The map at bottom the larger red circles as the strategic activity centres. In the Perth context, you won't know the name, but they're places like Fremantle, Rockingham, Armidale, Midland, Joondalup, Stirling. So there are about a dozen of those which the panel believes, well, under this option, make a logical potential focus for the new local governments. The panels consider that the city of Perth should be increased in scale. Say currently 18,000 population. It's also calling for significant change. That I guess the panel has really, previous reviews in Perth have, going back decades, have talked about reducing the number of councils to 23 or 20 or some such number. That sort of level of change is seen as too sort of marginal, and that we'll only end up revisiting it down the track. And a bit like Jeff Kennett yesterday, changes in Victoria were sort of generational change, and he thinks leave them in place for a generation. This is what the panel is thinking, is that that's what we need in Perth, is that, set them up, make significant change now, robust boundaries, so that we can, end the debate and move forward for the long term. Once the new structure is settled, nevertheless, there needs to be some periodic review, and it's proposing that, given the growth of Perth and that there's continuing growth on greenfields on the fringe, that there does need to be some mechanism to deal with that changing growth. So it's proposing that there be some sort of system for coming back to it every 15, 20 years, of not looking at the whole picture, but just looking at how Perth has changed in 15, 20 years and where there might need to be change. It's also saying that creating larger local governments isn't going to solve all of Perth's problems. That it also needs to, engaging with the community is paramount, that should not be lost in the restructuring of local government. So it's looked at metropolitan governance, but it's now also looking at community governance in terms of maintaining community engagement and improving accountability. And that, I guess the panel's even got the view that even if the structures don't change tomorrow and the government doesn't proceed or local government doesn't change, it still saw, I guess as independent observers, the differences in approaches that councils were using and what was working, what was not working, I guess, and overall saw the need for, the potential for councils to be doing more in that space. It's also, in finding 20, saying that there should be a forum or council of Perth mayors, and I noticed that Chris Rose didn't mention the ComSec forum, but basically the panel sees the need for something like this because it doesn't exist at the moment. Seldom, until Welga had a meeting to comment on the draft findings in the last month, when it brought the 30 mayors in the room together, I don't know of an occasion when the 30 Perth mayors have been in the same room. And this is what we're saying, there should be some forum of Perth mayors that can speak for Perth and that can get together to really say, well, these are what we see as the priorities for Perth, and present them to the state and federal government. So the question of who speaks for Perth, they can then say that, collectively they do. And the last area of findings is about governance, and it's largely about clarifying the roles of CEOs and elected members, about councils operating more as boards in a board-like manner. In WA, we don't have compulsory voting at local government elections, and the panel is, under this finding, proposing that that be the case. And it's proposing mandatory training of elected members and increased remuneration. Elected members in WA are probably the lowest paid, if that's the word, in the country. But all this is a package. There wouldn't be mandatory, I guess they're not seeing that there should be mandatory training without there being increased remuneration. It goes hand in hand. One of the challenges of this sort of finding is that the panel has only been asked to look at metropolitan Perth. And these are the sorts of things that the panel thinks are required for Perth. So the challenge for this is that how does that roll out? What are the implications for the rest of the state? And that's a matter for government, matter for the sector. So I'm at the end, and you can go to your morning tea shortly, but the draft findings were put out for public comments, and we've got about 200 submissions, and those comments are being taken into account in forming the panel's recommendations. The final report was due to the Minister at the end of June. So behind this calm exterior is a furiously peddling executive officer working on the report for the panel to submit it to the Minister in the next few days. The panel is in fact having a final meeting early next week to finalise the report, and it will be submitted to the Minister soon after. So we didn't quite make it at the end of June, but it will be within a week or two. And what the Minister does with it, I say that's a matter for the Minister. I guess he will take it to Cabinet, whether it gets released and so on from there. We'll see. But the panel will have done its work and provide recommendations to the Minister. And there will be a map in the panel's report. It won't be this map, which is just the metropolitan region scheme showing Perth as one entity, but there will be a map. And so thanks for the opportunity, John, to present on what's happening in Perth. The final thing I'll say is that just watch what's happening in WA, because there's a state election March next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Might be a couple of questions for Chris before he leaves. Break for morning tea. Anyone commenting? Yeah. Kevin? Just a name and organisation, please.
Eva Rozika, Hobart City Council. State of Tasmania, very tiny, but very similar to Western Australia on a microcosm scale. Large rural areas, few people in them, small councils, totally struggling, large metro areas, Hobart and Launceston. In all of these Future of Local Government conference meetings, I've yet to hear anyone come up with a resolution or a means of addressing the issue. How can I have my institutional arrangements to serve these big areas, the waste, the water, the rubbish, all of that? And at the same time, how can I ensure my small communities, because they even exist in the metro areas, maintain that sense of identity and place? Any ideas for structures?
That's the key question of sort of being able to operate at this high level of efficiency but maintaining the community connectedness is sort of what you're getting to, is that tension there. And the panel, that's been a key consideration for the Metro Review panel. And it's looked at a whole range of community engagement processes, and thinks there's the potential for maintaining that closeness to the community, through those, if they're supported and resourced in the right way. And the City of Swan in Perth is one of the larger local governments, and it has a place management approach to its diverse communities. And that's the sort of thing that the panel has considered to be a useful approach of where you can have maintain that community connectedness in a larger local government.
Okay. Any other questions, Gavin?
Thank you very much. John Quinn, Pyrenees Shire. A couple of questions, actually. First one, getting out into the rural areas of Western Australia, your rural shires are likely to be almost exclusively made up of Aboriginal people. Has any thought been given to perhaps lumping in, or not lumping in, traditional tribal and clan entities into enemies into one entity?
Interesting question. Unlike, say, South Australia and New South Wales, all of Western Australia is incorporated in local government areas. The interface between local government and Indigenous communities remains sort of an issue that's being, as I say, trying to be resolved between local government and the Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth's trying to shift more responsibility onto local government in respect to those communities. It's probably the case that I don't know that the Aboriginal population isn't in the majority in any of the local government areas, bar a couple. And there's one shire. So we've created new shires in recent years in Perth, in Western Australia, and one of them that was created 20 odd years ago was the Shire of Nanajaraku in the Western Desert or Central Desert, which is basically exclusively Aboriginal community. And the decision was made there that to excise it from the pastoral-based Shire of Wiluna and to set it up as a mainstream local government. So that was the approach 20 years ago, and I think it's been successful for that community. And but as I say, there are still issues in terms of delivering services to Aboriginal communities that are being worked through with the Commonwealth.
Okay, can you please thank Chris Berry from Western Australia?